Well, a warm welcome to you all to this, the 9th in our series of RHEA Talk webinars. This one to discuss the challenges of commercial space launch. Like our previous webinars, this one will be recorded. So if you want to see this one or any of our previous webinars, please visit the media section on our website, www.rheagroup.com. So now to the webinar. Firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is John Bone, Chief Commercial Officer for RHEA Group, and I will be your facilitator for today's session. What I will ask you to do is if you can use the Q&A area in your Zoom app at the bottom here to pose any questions to our panel members. This I will do after some initial conversation that we will have across the 5 panel members. If your question is targeted at a specific panel member, please make this clear in your question. Thank you. Talking to the panel, today I'm joined by 5 distinguished panel members who are here to discuss the new and exciting subject of how commercial space launch is making space far more accessible and the associated challenges they have experienced in the quest to make low-cost access to space a reality. So let me introduce my panel. So first I have Mark Roberts. After leaving the Royal Air Force, where he was Director of the Air Staff in the MOD between 2007 and 2010, with space and cyber policy in his portfolio, he moved into the commercial sector and now works as the Defence and Security Lead for RHEA. Mark is also the Project Director for the Spaceport 1 Consortium, developing a vertical launch capability in the Outer Hebrides. Continuing that theme, I have Alison MacCourquodale, and she joined the Western Isles Council and have been practicing this Caller Nan Isla Shear, hopefully I got that right, in 2000, having graduated from Aberdeen University with an LLB in honours degree in LLB, what's legal. She has been employed with the Council's Economic Development Department since 2004 and led on the development of the Western Isles Credit Union and rollout of Caller's Financial Inclusion Programme. Immediately prior to joining Spaceport 1 in 2018, Alison was the tourism lead for the authority. So welcome, Alison. Next, I have Patrizio Summa. He is the Director of Special Projects and Performance Monitoring, Commercial Coordinator to Aeroporti Puglia, SPA, and is currently and Chairman of the Auditors Board of Puglia Pension Fund of Italy Air Transport Sector. After graduating in economics, he held the position of CFO of Aeroporti Puglia and other companies operating the ICT and technology innovation sector. So welcome, Patrizio. And next I have Alan Thompson. Alan is Head of Government Affairs in Skyrora, supporting the launch vehicle manufacturer to achieve its ambition of providing regular access to space, launching from the UK. Alan is responsible for managing and engaging with all stakeholders across industry and government, including the spaceflight regulators in the UKSA and CAA. Alan's background is in international trade and development and gives a new perspective to the space industry developing in the UK, in particular, the ambition to challenge the current economic paradigm and shift that the new space economy will necessitate. So welcome, Alan. And finally, but certainly no means least, I have Christopher Brain. Christopher is the operational lead in the development of the new European concept operations for higher airspace and new users, notably commercial space operations. Chris worked in air traffic management 40 years. He started his career as an air traffic controller and assumed leading roles in creating new concepts of operation with multiple stakeholders and developing operational system and performance requirements. So thank you, Chris, and welcome. So for those of you who are not familiar with RHEA, RHEA is a security and space engineering services company with over 750 employees across Europe and Canada. RHEA's focus is to add value to our customers through the specific delivery of expertise, technologies, and techniques. Today, we'll focus on one of those areas of expertise, that of providing commercial space launch. So let's open the questions. So Mark, first of all, as RHEA's lead on commercial launch, could you set the scene of RHEA's involvement in this subject and your experience of confronting those challenges so far?
Yeah, thanks, John. So just to situate everybody, RHEA is essentially providing the project and technical support to Alison and the team up on the Western Isles. And what we are creating at the moment is a spaceport which is dedicated to suborbital launch. If you go back a little while in the project, we looked at orbital launch, but for a variety of different reasons, we decided to change direction. Some of them are linked to the challenges, which I'm going to go through in a moment as I see them. But we have been, for the last 18 months to 2 years, absolutely relentlessly focused on suborbital launch, and that is what we are putting in place at the moment. The project is going through planning approval at the moment. We're expecting a planning consent within the next 3 to 6 months. We're also expecting, I'm touching wood here, a little funding package to enable us to deliver the infrastructure, the really quite modest infrastructure, but nevertheless quite sophisticated infrastructure to enable us to do the launch activities. And whilst there may be a small sort of heartbeat of small launch activity before we go fully operational, we're expecting to go fully operational in about Q2 next year, and from that point onwards, delivering up to 10 launches a year. And we have a healthy pipeline of customers, which is always a nice, reassuring position to be in. So we're pretty confident that we'll first of all put it in place. Second, that we'll be operationally delivering, and third, that we've got a good customer base for a sustainable business. So the title of the session is challenges, and I've been involved with the spaceport activities one way or another for nearly 7 years. In fact, pretty much from the very early days of the government, the UK government deciding that it was going to get into launch. At that time, the aspiration was very much around space tourism, horizontal launch, and we, amongst others, lobbied fairly hard for the government in the UK to consider vertical launch for satellite delivery, primarily into sun synchronous and LEO, and eventually that message was heard, and during the development of regulation, actually there was more of a swing towards that type of launch, although obviously the UK through Newquay and Prestwick are looking at horizontal launch, but the majority of sites in the UK that are looking to do launch activity are looking at vertical, and that indeed is where we are. So talking about challenges, I think I would sum the challenges up as in a couple sort of chunks of area. The first is viability. The second is credibility, and I'll cover all of these in a little bit of detail in a moment. The third is stakeholder engagement. For those of you who know anything about launch in the UK, you would not be surprised to hear me use the word regulation as one of the challenges, although you might be a little bit surprised at my view on it, but we'll come back to that. So if I turn to viability, the first thing that really happened, and I think the thing that underpins all of this, is that it's new for the UK. Arguably, we did launch years and years and years ago, but actually launch in the sort of new space context is new in the UK, and that sort of underpins everything that surrounds the challenges, as you'll see in a minute. But the first thing that we needed to do was to determine that the site that we'd found and the operations that we wanted to try and do were viable. So the viability of the operation was really the key first step, and the approach that we took to that really was to try and find reasons not for why it should be viable, but for why it shouldn't be viable, and really looking for things that were going to trip us up. And we spent a fair amount of time doing that, well over a year, looking through what we understood of the requirements and whether that was going to be whether there were going to be any problems for us. What that resulted in is a fair amount of site design and then site redesign work. We were somewhat stifled by the fact that we had two, if you like, issues that made it slightly difficult to design a site. The first is that we didn't actually have a customer, although we were talking to a launch provider very early on, and we've talked to launch providers throughout, but there was nobody dedicated. So actually we've always been designing a facility that has utility for more than one customer, and that provides a number of challenges in its own right. Very much simpler to design a site for one customer. And the other points around design, and particularly the elements of safety around design, was that we did have a regulatory vacuum. We knew that the regulation was going to be very considerable, and that it would be an industry that would be heavily regulated. But as the regulation was being developed by the DFT and the UK Space Agency, there was something of a vacuum there, and what it didn't allow us really to do was to test ideas, and I'll come back to that concept in a moment. So really, we proceeded on the basis of, is anything going to stop us doing this? We couldn't find anything. There were always difficulties, but there wasn't anything that was actually going to technically stop us. And then the second aspect of viability, of course, is the commercial part. It needs to be a business. Now we have a business model that is focused relentlessly on providing economic benefit to the local area. So there is not a business that is focused on making huge profits. And in fact, for those of you who will know the suborbital market, the suborbital market is not a place where you go and get big profits. But what we can do is we can use the revenues to generate jobs. And actually, as the business progresses forward over the next 2 to 3 years, we're anticipating some diversification, and that actually will probably create more revenue, but it will certainly create more economic benefit. The next area I would cover is credibility. It's an interesting corner of the space industry that we're talking about here, because it is new. And one of the things that we were absolutely determined to be, and partly because of seeing the way that other people were behaving, one of the things that we were absolutely determined to be was credible. There's a lot of hyperbole. It's less so now, but there was a lot of hyperbole at the beginning of this sort of UK launch endeavour, and we absolutely actively stayed away from that. So we've always tried to promise things that we know that we can deliver. We've always tried to say things that are perceived to be credible and sensible. And there are a couple of sort of vehicles for that. One is our concept of operations. We've been developing the concept of operations pretty much the whole time that we've been working on this, and iteratively developing it over time. And the concept of operations has become a very useful narrative for clearly how the site operates, but also to support that credibility point. So if people are able to see that what we're suggesting is intuitive, it's relatively easy to read and get through, the concept of operations has actually been quite an important part of our engagement more widely. And our experience of sort of maintaining in a very precious way our credibility is that we have got better results. We've ended up with a very good relationship with all of our stakeholders, and that's good. And I think that the credibility element is added to that. And they know that when we pick the phone up and want help, that it's genuine. It's it's a need rather than anything else. And I talked a little bit about stakeholder engagement. I would just say that it's getting a lot better now. The stakeholders associated with launch in the UK, but to start with, there's a lot of unfamiliarity, particularly from stakeholders that wouldn't necessarily be sort of traditionally interested in launch or space operations. So I'm thinking about, we've got Chris is going to talk about airspace, but airspace is a good example. Sea space is a good example of stakeholders that absolutely are vital to what we are doing, but early on, quite understandably, they didn't really understand what it was that we were asking for. So there's been a little bit of a challenge around them educating us and us educating them, but nevertheless, that has worked. That's worked very well. And then, conscious of time, I will just talk very briefly about regulation. I am not in the habit of knocking the regulation. It comes back to the credibility point earlier. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with our regulation. The only thing that I would say is that because of the way that it's done in the UK, it was difficult for the Department for Transport, difficult for the UK Space Agency to engage in any more than a sort of teams sense about specific issues. They were legally constrained not to, and so that added a degree of complexity to when we were developing various aspects of the operation, various aspects of the site. It would be great to turn around to the regulator and say, well, we're thinking of doing this, does that work? but actually during the period of development of the regulation, they just could not answer those questions. That said, I think what the regulator, the various stakeholders in the regulatory activity did was very good. They consulted as much as they could with us. It was more a one-way conversation than a bilateral or a multilateral conversation. But nevertheless, they told us where they were going, and they told us how it was shaping up, and that was good. I would say that now that the regulation is in place, which is very nearly a year ago now, that the regulator, which is now the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, have been absolutely superb and really engaged, and very happy to advise and support. And I think there was a sort of transition about this time last year where everybody kind of realised that we're all learning together, and it's not a bad sort of paradigm to have that. You know, there was a lot of knowledge in industry which was not previously sort of accessible to the regulator, and there's obviously a lot of knowledge in the regulator that was previously not accessible from industry. So how have we dealt with it? Well, I would describe this as a project of very considerable ambiguity, less and less as we move forward. So the way that we've basically approached it is, as we've seen issues coming up, we've been pretty good, we think, at horizon scanning, so that we see the issue rather than it being a requirement for next week, that we've seen the issue sometime in advance. And then we've engaged with those that may be able to solve whatever the problem is. And in essence, what we've done is we've delivered a number of ideas or concepts to get us to the right point, and tested it with experts, and RHEA has been implicit in that, not only developing the ideas and the concepts, but also testing the ideas with an incredible range of experts that we've got sitting behind John and I and others. You always find somebody in RHEA, if it's a space-related thing, you can find somebody in RHEA who's done it, and that's a good thing. But from the point of view of the project, it is, you know, ambiguity from my perspective is good up to a point, and really it's been about being prepared to be iterative in the approach that we take, and change direction when we've needed to.
Fantastic.
That's me, John.
Thanks, Mark. That's a really good starter, and leads me on to Alison. Really, I've got two questions for you, Alison. The first question, of course, is how's my Gallic? The second question is more about what I mean. Mark alluded there to the economic benefits of the spaceport. I mean, can you elaborate on let's say from an operational point of view, the challenges faced by local government in realising those economic benefits?
Well, first of all, John, your Gaelic is not bad for a beginner. I'd probably give you a 4 out of 5. Yeah, you mentioned the economic benefit, and I think it's important to scene set a wee bit. And I would say one of the most common questions we're asked is, why, as a council, are you trying to build a spaceport? Well, the answer is we have to. We have to diversify and grow the local economy, and we have to create jobs locally for local people. The spaceport in the early years will create 25 jobs. Doesn't sound like many to most of you probably, but if you put that in a Glasgow context, that's the equivalent of 5,500 jobs in Glasgow. So very much not to be sneezed at, and we definitely want to make sure that it happens here in the Outer Hebrides. So challenges, I would say very much planning, the planning process, and also managing expectations. So in terms of planning, it's been challenging, and it would be for any developer. There's probably some on this call, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but because we are the local authority, we're the poacher and the gamekeeper, we are the developer and the regulator, so we have to be hugely cautious about the approach we take. We know Scotland's perfect for spaceport. It's got a huge landmass and a very low population density, particularly in rural areas. And if you forgive my language, but I'm going to quote Billy Connolly, he described Scotland as miles and miles of bugger all. Well, yes, Billy, that's true, but those miles and miles are full of environmentally sensitive areas, designated areas, marine protection areas, the list goes on. And as a developer, it's a bit of a nightmare trying to navigate your way through that. All these designations make achieving planning permission very, very difficult. And it just so happens that we, as Mark described, decided that Sculpic Farm was the best place to locate Spaceport 1. Well, it's bang slap in the middle of a huge pile of designations. And we are trying to build a spaceport at a time when everybody is more environmentally aware and conscious. Navigating our way through the development of an environmental impact assessment, well, it was a huge learning curve and it's certainly been challenging. It's taken us 2 years to prepare that EIA. A colleague said to me at the outset, whatever time you've allocated to get through planning, add a year. Well, I would say add a year and double it. It's just taken an age. It's been very challenging and time consuming to establish not just the environmental baseline, but also to define and set out each of the technical specifications for each of the launch operators launch vehicles that we've included in our EIA. As launch operators are furiously trying to satisfy their stakeholders and their shareholders, you know, they're trying to develop their technology, they're trying to test it. We're on the phone asking irritating questions about the diameter of their nose cone, how they think they're going to transport fuel to the Western Isles, and how they're going to fuel up their vehicles. They've got better things to do, but unfortunately, this is hugely important for us. So as I said, it took 2 years to complete the EIA. It's a very comprehensive EIA. I'm hugely proud of it. I think Mark is too, and I think it will stand us in good stead when we come to submit our Spaceport licence and AEE. But we are still looking at a 12-month determination period. So fingers crossed for the next few months for Spaceport 1. Managing expectations. I did not realise what was going to be involved, and I said, oh yeah, I'll take on the role of Spaceport 1 development officer. I think I've become a negotiator in a hostile situation. I have to wear a disguise to go to the local shop, because as much as there is a huge amount of support locally, there's a very, very strong opposition group, and they have been fantastic about spreading their narrative. So for me, a huge challenge has been managing expectations and raising awareness of what Spaceport 1 is not. It's not the Cape Canaveral of the Western Isles. We won't have rockets exploding left, right and centre, spraying debris and fuel over the population of North Uist. And it sounds humorous, but it's actually taken up an inordinate amount of time. And it's one of the reasons we took such time and care on our EIA. We want to be able to refute these allegations, but we want also to be able to robustly respond to the very legitimate concerns and questions of our statutory consultees, SEPA, for example. In terms of managing expectations, another issue has been a lack of awareness of the planning process, and particularly of the nuances of undertaking an environmental impact assessment. I've heard so many times, what is a hold-up? What is taking you so long? It should have been there by now. You're only building a concrete pad. It's only a bit of concrete on the ground, and you're only upgrading the road. What they don't realise is it is rocket science. Unlike many of the projects that the council deliver, it's not rocket science. This is, and it's hugely complicated. And you know, the sector is changing so rapidly that our documents have had to evolve very, very quickly. So the EIA is not about what you want to build, it's about what you want to do, what goes into the rockets, what comes out of the rockets, where they go, where they land. So yeah, to summarise, John, planning, very, very challenging, and managing expectations. And it relates to what Mark's saying about stakeholder engagement. You need just to keep communicating and keeping on. I think if you're going to build a spaceport, any of you out there, make sure you've got plenty of time and plenty of tenacity. So thanks.
Thank you, Alison. That was really insightful. Thank you. And now taking maybe a sort of a 180-degree loop around to Alan, as a space a launch operator, potentially. How do you see the challenges, and how are you working as Mark put it, as the customer of the spaceport?
Thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this discussion this afternoon. I think what both Alison and Mark have just pointed towards is I would say incredibly complementary for what we're trying to do, which indeed, as you said, is to launch vehicles from Skolpig, from that farm, from that Spaceport 1 project. Why is it complementary? It's because all of the stuff, all of the paperwork that Alison has been lumped with in terms of the economic evaluation, so the environmental evaluation, as she mentioned already, what size is our nose cone? What comes out the bottom? What do you do with the stuff if your fuel, spills? How do you manage that? And how do we answer these questions collaboratively and in an aligned way? So that's the one angle. Yes, I feel very much part of this project because we've shared our requirements, our needs, and how we as a company are trying to, what kind of position we're trying to project. And indeed, the project, the Spaceport 1 project, has been incredibly good for us as a learning curve as well, and as a partner and a participant in that process. Yes, you could say when we started the company 5 years ago, we had almost like a completely blank piece of paper. As Mark said, viability, or what's going to stop us from being viable. So we stuck our toe in the water. We as a company, Skyrora, came up with this idea of starting from small and trying to go big. In government talk or in military talk, it's de-risking. You do something small and then you escalate, you to go up to the next level and repeat it and see if it has the same effect or what other lessons you need to learn from that. And that's the way we started our journey. We wanted to start with small launch vehicles, with small rockets, glorified fireworks going to 5 kilometers, and having a lot of fun with them on the one hand, but also then using them as the test vehicles to test the waters with the regulatory environment, with the people that Alison just mentioned and Mark mentioned, not just the Civil Aviation Authority, with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, with Marine Scotland. What happens if we end up dropping a launch vehicle in your water, in your territory? What are we going to do about it? What's the environmental effect, et cetera, et cetera? So it's working through every single one of those strands and trying to answer those questions, even though sometimes you haven't actually done that physical exercise. So for some of the launch vehicles that we've shared details as part of the evaluation of environmental effects for Spaceport 1, we haven't launched them yet. So we don't ultimately, it's all a bit sort of hypothetical. We're still we're based on the models of what we know. So as I said, by starting on a small iteration of small vehicles, we're trying to build up what we do know and then extrapolate to the next step and then demonstrate that actually, yes, it is only just another step up. And that's for absolutely everything that's involved in the launch vehicle. That's avionics. That's how we stop the vehicle if we need to in an emergency, how we stop the fuel line and actually halt the vehicle. It's everything to do with the safe operation of that vehicle. It's how we fuel the vehicle. It's how we treat the vehicle on the launch pad. It's how we treat the launch pad itself, as Alison said, not just a block of concrete, but actually the infrastructure that's required to make that happen safely. It's how we engage with the spaceport itself, as Mark said, the concept of operations, the ConOps, and how does that fit into who's going to be managing the airspace into which we fire. So it's not just the land, it's the air, and it's the water. So it's absolutely every single environment you can probably think of, as well as space on top of it, hopefully, when we get there. So yeah, that's been the challenge. We've been carefully taking, I suppose you could say, confident steps forward. I should say, and it's been very much in collaboration with Mark's experience, that we approached the regulator back in 2019 to try to simulate what would happen, what was required for the launch of our first 2-stage vehicle. And we had an extensive process and a lot of learning, which we believe formed a huge amount of, it was a good informing process for the regulator to get their heads around what was required in terms of regulation. So this was prior to the regulations actually being written and the regulator actually understanding the essence of the process. I should say, I know Mark's had some very good words from the regulator. I would endorse them as well, but also say from our point of view, it's never fast enough. We're a launch vehicle manufacturer. We're in a race against time. We're in a race for trying to capture that new data to help manage our environment better. What do I mean by that? I mean, we're in a race to get satellites up there to have better Earth observation, to better understand the effects of what we're doing. And we are the logistics service providers to make that happen. So as I said, we are the impatient bunch in this lot. We're the people with our foot to the accelerator. and it's never fast enough for us. So we're challenging ourselves in the first instance to be fast. That's why we've got rockets. We need to be fast as possible. We need to hit our whatever you call it, critical velocity, so that we actually get into orbit. And it's the same here with our progress and with our development. We need to hit critical velocity with our partners, with the spaceports, and with everyone aligned, so that we can get over the line. I think, as Mark said, the regulator's done a great job so far, at least in the UK, in making this happen. Part of the fun that I've had is not just being satisfied with trying to do it in the UK, and the UK now pushing that forward. We've looked to try and introduce the concept of launch to other adjacent states, partly because, again, my motto is preventative engagement is never a miss. Being able to reach out to people who don't yet know that you're about to do something that could affect them, that usually is a useful starting point from which to start these engagements. And one of these engagements has involved, in particular, Iceland, because indeed, as you're probably aware, if you're firing launch vehicles from Skolpeg north over the Arctic ice caps, we will end up with one of our stages in Icelandic territorial water. So as part of that setup, we've had preventative engagement with the Icelandic authorities to try to simulate what that means. We went further and we said, actually, this is the activity that we're doing. This is the smaller launch vehicles. And again, we've introduced them to this concept of launch. And we are doing very much similar to what we've done with the UK environment, walking through this setup with the Icelandic authorities around how a permission could be crafted and what the absolute effects and challenges that could mean. The one thing I would mention again that Alison mentioned, that spent a lot of time talking about, is the environment. I think, again, from our point of view, actually, we see the environment as I suppose you could say, the double whammy. We as a space company, not many people in this country really know what space is and why we need space. So as a launch vehicle manufacturer, as a logistics service provider, as I said, we're delivering satellites into space. And in the first instance, the satellites, 80% of those satellites are Earth observation satellites. So we have actually achieved a recognition from the environment agencies that actually we are helping them get better data sets to make that happen. And for that reason, we're beginning to try to broach the topic of us being known as an environmental launch aspiration. So what does that mean? That means we're trying to do it with as much environment in mind as possible. And the reason for that also is because we want the buy-in from the general public. We want the public to better understand what this activity involves and what the deliverables are for not just the industry, not just governments, but actually for the country. It's not just jobs, it's an improved way of living. So we do believe that actually the environment, while again, there's a huge amount of involvement and time spent on preparing these environmental documents and answering questions about how long your second stage is going to be in the ocean and what that means to the whales or to the fish, and actually how you're going to recover it, and then, and everyone else, and satisfying the regulatory, the appearance of the regulatory requirements. Actually, at the end of the day, we want to be confident to say that we are doing this for the benefit of our environment and for a better management system for our environment. So yeah, it sounds maybe talking about the regulations, we're always trying to see this as an opportunity and as an enabling and unlocking of what happens next. So it's a really exciting journey to be on. And as I said, it's a delight to be able to be a partner with the Spaceport and with the local regional authority, and indeed with RHEA on making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for that insight. So Patrizio, we've talked very much about Spaceport 1 and the UK so far. Just for you, I mean, do these challenges sound familiar? And what do you see as the main challenges trying to create your spaceport activities in the southern part of Italy?
Hello to all, to everybody. Yes, Aeroporti di Puglia is an airport network. We manage 4 airports: Bari, Brindisi, Foggia, and Grottaglie. Grottaglie, for us, is the airport dedicated to aerospace and aeronautic industry operations. Now in Grottaglie, we have a plant of Leonardo that for the production of the fuselage of the Boeing 787, and other plants that for the production of the Euromail, the Eurodrone, a project of Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, and other companies of aeronautical production. But for the favorable condition, meteo condition, and facility condition, Grottaglie is being designed by the Civil Aviation Authority, the Italian Civil Aviation Authority, ENAC, as the test bed for unmanned operation, and it was designed as the sole national spaceport of Italy, because Grottaglie has the requirements for this operation, for horizontal launch. Mm-hmm. We have a study about the situation of and also the commercial exploitation of these facilities. And then we start from a huge presence of infrastructure, because Grottaglie has a runway of 3,400 meters, has 250 hectares of areas, 16,000 square meters of urbanistic space and areas, 110,000 square meters of apron, 2,000 square meters of offices and other facilities. Mm-hmm. But this is building the proper infrastructure is not the most time-consuming of the challenge. The challenge is the regulation. The right regulation agreements, national, international, to guarantee the appropriately licensed operation in the spaceport. Then ENAC, the Civil Aviation Authority of Italy, has published a manual, a regulation manual in October 2020, but now is coming a new version. And in this regulation of the infrastructure, of the assembly building, and of the propellant facility, then this is the challenge for us in this matter. Then all the planning, all the regulation, and all the operations will have to be an early discussion with the operator that will fly in Grottaglie, because the operator is a condition for all the facilities and the infrastructure that we have to build or to regulate. With the Civil Aviation Authority, we are going to deep in this matter. At commercial, on the commercial line, we think that in 3-5 years, in Grottaglie will be suborbital operation. Also, satellite avio launch, like a ride share or dedicated launch, or government launch. We think that the government launch and operations will be the first operation that will push all the business. For this, with the Civil Aviation Authority, with the ATM provider, with the Italian Space Agency and the National Research Council, we are constitute a new company that will manage this spaceport, also to attract investment and attract partnership, because we think that also apart infrastructure, apart regulation, apart all the technical issue, the spaceport will be an ecosystem with the university, with the territory, with the stakeholders, and will push also the enhance of the skill professionals, of the increasing of the economic value of the territory and the impact for all the economy in Puglia, and also in southern Italy for us. The skill, the connection with the university, polytechnical, and other school dedicated to this sector for us is the big result, the very important result that we aim. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrizio. Interesting to see the similar type of challenges. You mentioned the regulator, you mentioned CAA a couple of times there. And so, Chris, I'm interested from EUROCONTROL's point of view now. So do you think European airspace and aviation, with all its current users, procedures, and processes, are ready for commercial spaceflight?
Yeah. First, thanks for inviting me to this session. It's really interesting. But to answer your question, I have to be frank. Yes and no is the answer. Space is not our thing. As you know, EUROCONTROL, our mission is to support European aviation, not really the space sector. We're doing that for more than 40 states. In Brussels, we have an ops room. We're called the network manager. Every hour, we're evaluating the demand against capacity. If we find that the demand is higher than the available capacity in the system, then we start to issue slot times on behalf of the air navigation service providers. So that's one of our key tasks. We also handle flight plans. Anything that flies in European airspace, they send it to us, and then we distribute to the NSPs. I'll come back to that in a few seconds, because that's relevant to space operations. But occasionally, we have been involved in rocket firing. We get involved sometimes with ESA firing from French Guiana, where we're involved in helping traffic a route round the airspace they block, sometimes in the North Atlantic, and also sending rockets in the Arctic, and occasionally the French military fire rockets in the Bay of Biscay. So these are occasional activities we're involved in. So we're not really ready yet for regular operations from spaceports and activities. So we've taken a good look at this, and with the European Commission, we're now working together on this. Today, as I've tried to highlight, airspace is a resource like the sea, the land, even space. We're only occupying probably about 10 or 15% of it at the moment with the normal traffic. If we look at it's a huge vertical volume available. It's not really used at all, and that goes up to where aviation law finishes, and of course space begins. And I know there's a debate that's not on that subject. So there is a huge volume there. But what I wanted to signal, one of the challenges for us is that you're only one sector that is now competing potentially for the airspace above 50,000 feet. We're in a dialogue now with a number of other new entrants. So, for example, high altitude, long endurance platforms, and the return of supersonic transport, which we are anticipating to be over the land as well as the sea in the new generation. And we're in a dialogue with people planning hypersonic transport. Some of these vehicles will be unmanned. Most of them will be unmanned. But I just wanted to signal that future challenges ahead will involve all these people perhaps looking for reserved airspace, dedicated trajectories, which we will need to manage. So our thoughts are that the kind of management we do today, below 15 kilometers, if you like, could be extended further higher as a continuum, and is perhaps needed. There are basically three challenges we see involving new entrants, and it's clear that commercial space seems to be in the lead at the moment. One is how to integrate them, or how to arrange the transit of the ATS airspace below 50,000 feet, for example, going up and going down. What services are required above 50,000 feet to the edge of space? Some vehicles will stay in that volume, others will transit, like space operations. And the third challenge is how will we interact with space traffic management, which is a term which is you can see widely now. Today it's all about monitoring satellites, but I mean there's something there that will be developed over time. And potentially operations will be transiting to and from space, and there'll be more management of that. So how will we operate with that new regime? So those are the main challenges. What are we doing then to solve, or at least attempt to solve these issues? We started to talk to the airlines a little bit. And as you can imagine, post-COVID, things are sensitive. Today, I noticed the traffic is at 27,000 movements across Europe. Is coming back. We're 85% there compared with 2019. But of course, when you explain these new entrants to the airlines, we explain this is a disruptive innovation. But of course, their concern is this innovation that's disruptive? They're being asked to save emissions. Clearly, the fuel is a big issue, and having to route round a piece of segregated airspace created by a space operation is just another challenge for them on their long list. So that's something I think that we need to discuss in the future. Essentially, back in 2019, the European Commission asked EUROCONTROL to start work on an operational concept for this higher airspace, we're calling it. And we've been working on that now for the last 18 months. We're now drafting the concept of operations. We've got some new users involved, obviously. We have some ANSPs involved, air navigation service providers, ENAV from Italy, DSNA from France. We have an advisory board, which is where we have the UKCAA, NATS, and ESA and EASA. And this concept of operations will describe how we will manage the new entrants in three regimes I explained: transit, current airspace, higher airspace, and then what's the interface going to be with space. And we'll look at this from a short, medium, and long-term basis. We're looking at a 2050 full vision, if you like, as the final goal. We had a workshop back in the spring, and people told us, please build this according to demand. And of course, that is a good way ahead. But so we've done some demand analysis, and this is a challenge, as you can imagine. We can document, or we can review the spaceports in the UK, in Italy and Spain. We see those. But high altitude platforms, return of supersonic, this is not so easy to evaluate, but we're doing that. And we will take that with us as we draft the concept of operations. The job will be finished by the end of the year. We're having some regular meetings now, and that work will be useful not just for EUROCONTROL and all our stakeholders. But the EASA, European Agency, of course, for Safety, will take this European concept of operations on board as part of input for the regulatory framework, which they're now starting to work on. And that's bigger, of course, than airspace, airspace management, airspace regulation. That will include certification, permits to fly, training, and of course licensing. So that's a huge job, but we're working towards that. And then finally, we are starting to work with pioneers. Operations are starting, as we all know. Virgin will launch hopefully in the autumn. We have a dialogue with them. We have arrangements in place to block the airspace. Saxavort we're in a dialogue with. Of course, this involves other ANSPs meetings, and of course, German Offshore Alliance is also another organization we're having a dialogue with, and they plan to launch from a boat in the middle of the North Sea. So we're starting. It's important for us, for a network manager, to integrate these operations clearly. So we're putting it as a high priority, and we've created our own strategic project within EUROCONTROL to deal with this. So that concludes what I have to say. John, thanks for listening.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. Just a reminder, we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. So just down there's a Q&A button if you want to raise any questions. I've got a couple to ask already, but please, if you can put some more in there, that would be great. So I've got a question for you, Mark. Do you believe space tourism may be set aside to deal with the strategic competition in space, or to support integrated strategic deterrence against the other competitors such as China for global security purposes? Also, is it conceivable that economic aspects of space are closely connected to military interests? Interesting question. Do you want to try and that one a response, Mark?
Interesting and challenging. Thank you, Robert. I'm going to make an assumption that you're talking primarily about the UK. I would say that the relationship between space tourism and other launch activity is probably being skewed by the commercial realities of doing the activities, rather than any sort of more substantial plan. But it's linked to very much to the second question, I think, which around the relationship between economic aspects of space and military interest. I think the answer to that is yes. And I believe that will get closer. And the primary reason that I say that is that I think most military spacefaring nations now, and also those that use product from the spacefaring nations, are seeing the incredible economic benefits of dual use. Now it's not new, as you will know, Robert, but I think all of the language that tends to come out of government and primarily out of MOD is how can we make really good use of dual use. So I think that the inextricable link, which already exists in some areas, but I think that's just going to get more intimate, and to a certain degree, I mean, one of the things that I was very privileged to do a few years ago when I was in the service was take part in the RHEA series of war games. I did that for several years, and in that period of time that I was involved with it, the preeminence of commercial capability in the calculus that was used by the then consortium to look at space capability dramatically changed. It changed from essentially military capabilities to much more dual use, and the benefits that are associated with that. And the primary benefit, I think, is economic.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody like to add to that response, Alan?
Yeah, I think, as Mark said, what we're seeing right now is actually more of the commercialization of space, particularly in the area of space situational awareness or space domain awareness. So particularly, it's noted in the US by the spatial intelligence agencies saying that actually their biggest problem is not the availability of data. It's actually how they can reconcile secure data with commonly available data, because actually the commonly available data is becoming much more ubiquitous, much more available and accessible. So yes, I think there is a perception that space is still very heavily sort of government required, and what's happening in the US is a very heavily government supported industry. It's not commercial. It does have a lot of commercial money in it, but without the government money that started it, it wouldn't be there in the first place. Yeah. And the model that the UK is trying to do is actually to make it more commercially viable and cheaper without the same significant government investment. So it's a kind of a difficult tightrope that the UK is working along, but I think they're doing a relatively good job at that. And we're finally getting now to a stage where we do believe that actually the commercial side of things can particularly in launch and an infrastructure and heavier and bigger, more expensive, bigger ticket kind of investment is actually beginning to get a better resonance with commercial investors outside of government articulation of requirement. So I do think that's the way forward. I think the challenge is at the moment that this is the paradigm that's changing at the moment. And again, it's the same paradigm that I think there's also another question further down about Karoo. You know, how could we possibly change this paradigm if it's government controlled? It's far too heavy and far too like a dinosaur. We can't move that fast. Actually, new space needs to be reactive, responsive, and agile. And that's the shift of the paradigm. We need to be able to, again, collaborate across the challenges that face us as a humankind, not just as governments. And that's the way forward, I think. But yeah, thanks.
Anybody else like to add to that? Okay, I've got a question here which I'll target at Alison to start with, which is regarding the environmental impact of the spaceport. What is the main thing being done to mitigate the impacts?
I would probably say the main mitigation is the fact that we moved from orbital to suborbital. That certainly made our journey through an EIA easier. We have a lot of mitigations, and I think we spent the most time looking at our pad design, and we've come up with, as Mark mentioned, a very sophisticated pad and drainage system. We are able to deal with catastrophic failure, which for some stakeholders would be the total loss of all fuel. So we know we're quite confident, well, A, that won't happen, but B, if it did, we could deal with that. More mitigations may emerge as we come through planning, but at the moment they're top two.
Patrizio, from your experience within Puglia, is there some key aspects that you're looking at from an environmental perspective? Can you add to this?
Yes, the environment issue for us is very, very important. Risk assessment study about density, inhabitant density, and risk associated to operations is for us is very, very important. Then we are trying to search other type of impact also for urbanistic and environmental problems. And we have commissioned this study to research center. RHEA is a aeronautic research center. But we think that Grottaglie is in a position, in a location that is very, very ideal for this operation, because there is a lower inhabitant density and a lower impact in around the territory. But this with ENAC and with the Italian Space Agency, this matter is a very, very important to study.
Okay, thank you. We've only got a minute left. I'll actually change the question slightly. The question is, as per current political situation, how the Soyuz launches from Karoo may be replaced. I mean, I will change that to say, what opportunities does that really give commercial space launch? You know, there are obviously political influences going on now, and maybe, you know, does this change the the importance of the regulatory aspect that we've all talked about. Maybe I'll start with Chris to pose that question to start with.
I think I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question, frankly, because space is not my main domain. But all I know is that we, in our concept of operations, we need to think globally, and clearly operations will be taking place outside Europe. That may originate outside Europe and interact with us. So basically, we're trying to take a wide view in the work we're doing, to expect innovation and new sites operating, and newcomers coming into the European airspace environment from locations that may be way outside Europe. So that's something that we need to work to, and we need to work with ICAO on this, which is really important.
Okay, thank you. And same for you, Mark. Last word on that one. Is there more opportunity offered by the political situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just pick up on the point that was just made about it being global. I would say that because the Soyuz launches from Kourou are primarily equatorial launches. That's not what we're doing from the UK. So I don't think there is a because we're looking to go over the pole. So I don't think there's an instant read across. However, I would be amazed if Alan is not sitting there rubbing his hands with the glee, thinking, how can I make an even bigger rocket and start to service a bit of that market. But yes, globally, using Chris's word, globally, I think there's a real opportunity. The UK perhaps not so big.
Okay, well, we're a minute over, but thank you, panel. Thank you for a really interesting conversation. Thank you to all, and thank you to everyone who's listened in on this. As I say, if you want to check out the recording, it's on our website along with the previous webinars. But I look forward to welcoming you on the next one. Thank you very much.